At my 60th birthday party, my daughter approached me during the toast, gestured to the wine glass in my hand, and whispered, "That's the one I chose for you, Dad. Drink up, everyone is waiting." The room was full of guests, music, and laughter. To them, she looked like a loving daughter. But I had seen her near the wine table minutes earlier. I had also heard the recording hidden in my study. So I smiled, raised the glass, and said, "To family, and to the truth." Then I did the one thing no one in that room expected. What I'm about to share with you isn't easy to tell. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and let me know, have you ever trusted someone who didn't deserve it? Your answer might help someone else feel less alone. Quick note, some details in this story are fictionalized for storytelling purposes. What matters most is the lesson it carries. I knew something was wrong. 3 months before my 60th birthday party, the question was whether I had enough time to stop it. September. Twilight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my study. Golden light stretching across the mahogany desk, where I'd spent 31 years preparing legal briefs before retirement, pulled me from the New York State Supreme Court bench. 3 hours remained before guests arrived at the Garrett Villa here in Oyster Bay, Long Island. 3 hours before my daughter Diana, 28 years old, and carrying 1.2 million social media followers, would embrace me beneath the crystal chandelier in the main hall and tell me how much this night meant to her. 3 hours before someone attempted what I'd been tracking since June. I pulled the second phone from my desk drawer, the burner I purchased 3 months ago, when the first irregular transaction appeared in my quarterly review. The screen glowed with the private security firm's latest report. 3 additional wire transfers, each exactly $9,847, all originating from accounts bearing my name and signature authorization, all routed through shell companies I'd never established. The amounts stayed deliberately below the $10,000 federal reporting threshold. Whoever designed this scheme understood financial surveillance protocols. I have been a judge for 31 years. I know when a case is about to open. I know the scent of evidence gathering itself into critical mass, the moment when disparate facts congeal into prosecutable pattern. And tonight, the night of my 60th birthday, that scent drifted in from under the study door. The supplement bottle sat on my desk where I'd left it that morning. Standard vitamin container, amber plastic white cap, purchased at the pharmacy on Shore Road 6 weeks ago. I lifted it gently and shook. The faint operational hum confirmed the recording device inside still transmitted to the external receiver hidden in the library's ventilation grate. 42 days of ambient audio captured and encrypted, waiting for the moment when someone's guard dropped enough to speak plainly. I'd spent 3 decades reading defendants across courtroom tables. I understood the mathematics of conspiracy. Pressure applied over time, multiple actors coordinating separate pieces, and always the assumption that the target remained ignorant until too late. But retired judges make poor targets. We know how guilt telegraphs itself through micro-expressions, through transaction patterns, through the small behavioral inconsistencies that accumulate into certainty. The bay stretched beyond my window, gray-blue water catching the last sunlight. Margaret died 2 years ago in this house, pancreatic cancer, taking her in 7 months, despite every treatment Manhattan Oncology could offer. She'd made me promise 2 things. Before the morphine pulled her under, for the final time, take care of Diana, and don't let anyone destroy what we built together. I kept the first promise for 28 years. Tonight would test whether I could keep the second. How many times had I sat in this study, believing myself retired, believing the scales of justice no longer mine to hold? Footsteps echoed into main hall downstairs, heels on white marble, the specific cadence I'd heard since Diana learned to walk. I checked my watch, 6:15 p.m. She'd arrived 45 minutes before the catering team finished final preparations, earlier than necessary, unless she had preliminary tasks requiring privacy. I descended the curved staircase slowly, each step measured, keeping my expression neutral in the way 31 years on the bench had trained me. Composed. Observational. Giving nothing away. Diana stood beneath the crystal chandelier, holding an arrangement of white roses, fresh expensive, ordered that morning, based on the florist's card visible between stems. She wore a navy dress that photographed well for her followers, her dark hair swept into the elegant style Margaret once favored. When she saw me, her face transformed into what any observer would call daughterly affection. "Dad," she said, crossing the marble floor with arms extended. "I wanted to make sure everything is perfect for you tonight." The embrace lasted exactly 2 seconds. I counted. 2 seconds of her arms around my shoulders, 2 seconds of manufactured warmth, and then she released me with a smile that never reached the muscles around her eyes. A practiced smile. Professional. The same expression she deployed in her carefully curated Instagram posts, promoting sustainable fashion brands to her audience. Where my daughter learned that smile, I do not know. But I know one thing for certain, that is not the smile of the girl I raised for 28 years. "The roses are beautiful," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Your mother loved white roses. I remember," Diana replied, turning toward the waiting staff member near the dining room entrance. "Can you place these on the main table, the large crystal vase centered exactly?" As she moved, giving instructions with the confidence of someone who'd organized 100 influencer events, I watched her shoulder blades through the dress fabric. The tension there, subtle, controlled, but unmistakable to someone trained in reading physical stress markers during witness testimony. Then her eyes flicked toward the wine rack at the hallway's end. Half a second. Maybe less. A reflexive glance, the kind of unconscious confirmation people make when monitoring something important. Half a second is enough for a man who spent 3 decades reading defendants. 2 seconds. The mathematics of betrayal measured in heartbeats. Diana continued instructing the florist, her voice warm, her movements graceful. She laughed at something the young woman said about stem arrangement, and the sound carried the perfect pitch of someone completely at ease. But that half-second glance toward the wine rack played again in my mind, not random, not casual, but the reflexive check of someone confirming a plan. I had 3 hours until the party began. 3 hours to decide whether the daughter I loved was the enemy I'd been tracking. 3 hours before guests arrived, my former law partner, Harold Whitfield, and his daughter, my son Desmond, driving from his Columbia University dormitory in Manhattan. Diana's fiancé, Martin Briggs, whose Harvard law pedigree had impressed me 2 years ago when they announced their engagement. 3 hours before someone made their move against the $97 million in assets Margaret and I built over 40 years of careful investment. Diana turned back toward me, smile firmly in place. "You should rest before everyone arrives, Dad. Tonight's going to be wonderful. I promise." Promises. I'd heard thousands across courtroom proceedings. The guilty ones always sounded the most sincere. I watched Diana move through the hall, that half-second glance toward the wine rack still playing in my mind. 3 hours until the party began. Then headlights swept the front gate at 6:45 p.m., and I knew before my son stepped from the taxi that the envelope Desmond carried would change everything. I met him on the gravel pathway beneath the oak trees lining our driveway. Desmond Garrett, 22 years old, stepped from the vehicle with his Columbia University shoulder bag and a brown envelope held separately in his left hand, not tucked away with textbooks, but carried with the deliberate care of someone transporting evidence. "Dad," he said, embracing me briefly before pulling back. The tension in his shoulders telegraphed urgency. He glanced toward the main entrance, then lowered his voice. "Someone sent this to my dorm yesterday. No return address. No sender name." He handed me the envelope. Standard Manila, my son's dormitory address printed in generic computer font. I opened it there on the pathway, tilting the contents toward the porch light. A single document photocopy of a commercial real estate transfer contract dated March 2019. Queens County, New York. Property address 1247 Jamaica Avenue. The buyer's signature showed Martin Briggs's name in blue ink, the handwriting I'd seen on documents since he started dating Diana 3 years ago. The seller's signature had been obliterated with black marker thick strokes, rendering the name illegible. But the company address remained visible: Queens Urban Development Trust, with a Wilmington, Delaware registration number. "Do you know anything about this?" Desmond asked. I folded the document carefully. "Put it away. Keep it on you. Tonight is not the time." "Dad, I know about Martin," I said quietly. "I've known for 3 months. What I didn't know was Queens. This changes the scope." Desmond looked at me with the same expression from when he was 8 years old, asking why his sister didn't like him. A question I couldn't answer truthfully for 14 years, but would have to answer tonight. "Should I stay close to you tonight?" he asked. "No. Behave normally. Celebrate. Let them think we're just a happy family marking my retirement." "Are we?" he asked. "A happy family." I placed my hand on his shoulder. "We were. Maybe we will be again, but not tonight." The reception hall filled with guests at 7:30 p.m., exactly 80 people flowing through the main entrance beneath the crystal chandelier. Yellow lighting warmed the white marble floors. A jazz quartet played Cole Porter standards in the corner. Servers circulated with champagne and hors d'oeuvres. I stood near the center accepting congratulations, shaking hands, laughing at appropriate moments. But I was watching. Harold Whitfield arrived earliest among VIP guests at 7:38 p.m. 58 years old, my former law partner from our years at Garrett and Whitfield, before my appointment to the bench, now a New York State Senator representing the 7th District. We'd tried 43 cases together in the 1990s, winning 39. His handshake was warm, his palm was clammy. The room temperature held at 68 degrees, no reason for sweat. "Congratulations on your retirement, Judge," Harold said, his voice carrying practiced political bonhomie. "You've earned this celebration. Thank you for coming, Harold. Let me bring you a special glass later. I have a bottle I've been saving." Something flickered behind his eyes. Brief, controlled, but present. "That sounds wonderful," he said, then moved toward the eastern wall where other political figures had gathered. Martin Briggs entered 10 minutes later at 7:48 p.m. 45 years old, Harvard Law class of 2004, attorney at Briggs Capital Management. He'd been dating Diana for 3 years, engaged for 18 months. I'd approved of him initially, intelligent, well-credentialed, seemingly devoted to my daughter. His handshake felt different tonight. Quick, assessing. His eyes moved from my face to my inner jacket pocket, lingered there for half a second, then returned to meet my gaze. The recording device in my supplement bottle transmitted to a receiver in my study. But Martin's glance suggested he believed I might be carrying it on my person. "Edward," he said. 60 years, remarkable milestone. "Thank you, Martin. I'm glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it," he replied, then moved toward the north window where guests discussed retirement portfolios. Diana remained near the wine rack along the east wall, laughing with a former colleague from my court days. I stood motionless for 30 seconds, letting my eyes track the room's geometry. 3 people, 3 positions. Harold Whitfield holding court with political allies along the south entrance. Martin Briggs discussing investments by the north window. Diana entertaining guests near the east wall. Perfect triangulation, maximum coverage, even spacing. They never looked at each other. Never nodded. Never signaled. I'd spent 31 years watching defendants coordinate their stories before trial. I knew the choreography of conspiracy. When people have genuinely separate positions at a party, they drift. They circulate. They cluster and disperse organically. When people maintain fixed positions with mathematical precision, they're executing a predetermined plan. They moved through the room like planets in fixed orbit, separate, silent, bound by gravitational forces, invisible to everyone, except the man who'd spent 3 decades watching defendants lie. I lifted my wine glass without drinking, watching Diana laugh, watching Martin nod thoughtfully, watching Harold clasp shoulders with a fellow senator. 3 corners of a triangle, not a single glance exchanged between them. And I understood, with the certainty of 31 years on the bench, people who have signed an agreement no longer need to look at each other. They only need to wait for the signal. They only need to execute what they've already rehearsed. I checked my watch, 8:03 p.m. The party was scheduled until 10 p.m. Somewhere in the next hour and 57 minutes, someone would make their move. I set my untouched wine glass on a passing server's tray and walked toward my study, nodding politely at guests who tried to engage me in conversation. The recording device had been transmitting for 42 days. If Diana, Martin, and Harold had coordinated this conspiracy, at least one conversation would be captured. I needed to hear what they'd said when they thought no one was listening. I excused myself from the reception hall at 8:32 p.m., telling the nearest guests I needed to retrieve my prepared speech, a lie that felt appropriate given I'd been watching 3 people lie to me for the past hour. The study door closed behind me with a soft click. I turned the lock and left the overhead lights off, letting only the desk lamp illuminate the mahogany surface where I'd spent 3 months preparing for this moment. Jazz music echoed faintly from the hall saxophone, rendering a melancholy version of "I Get Along Without You Very Well," while I pulled the second phone from my jacket pocket. The security application loaded immediately. One alert flagged in red, "Unfamiliar Bluetooth signal detected in kitchen area at 4:30 p.m. Duration, 45 minutes. Signal terminated at 5:15 p.m. Exactly when Diana arrived early. Exactly when she claimed to be checking flower arrangements. I opened the second app, the one connected to the recording device hidden in my supplement bottle. The interface showed a single audio file, 4 minutes 17 seconds, captured at 6:47 p.m. this evening. Timestamp placing it approximately 30 minutes before the first guests arrived. I inserted the earbuds, pressed play, and kept my face completely still. Diana's voice came first. "Martin said you'd handle the paperwork. I just need to make sure Dad drinks from the right glass." A male voice responded. Harold Whitfield, unmistakable after 43 trials together. "The documents are ready. Once he signs the power of attorney transfer, we move the first tranche to the Cayman accounts within 72 hours. Diana again, "And you are certain the dosage won't—" "Non-lethal," Harold interrupted. 4 to 6 hours of incapacitation. Enough time for the signature, not enough to raise medical suspicion. Martin calculated it precisely. I stopped the audio at 31 seconds. My hand remained steady on the phone. My breathing stayed measured. 3 decades of receiving testimony without visible reaction had trained me evidence, testimony, confessions, all absorbed behind a mask of judicial neutrality. 30 seconds. I only needed to listen for 30 seconds. And in those 30 seconds, 28 years of memories of my daughter were rearranged into a completely different order. Every financial question she'd asked about the estate. Every casual inquiry about my supplement routine. Every suggestion that I deserved to relax more, worry less, trust the people who loved me. A father can survive many betrayals. But the moment you hear your daughter's voice confirming your worst fear, that moment doesn't end when the audio stops. It continues playing in every past conversation, recontextualizing every embrace, every smile, every time she called me Dad. I pocketed the phone at 8:38 p.m. Adjusted my tie in the mirror above the filing cabinet, and stepped back into the hallway. My expression revealed nothing. I'd delivered verdicts in cases where defendants' families wept in the gallery. I knew how to wear composure, like armor. The reception hall had filled further during my absence. Perhaps 90 guests, now clusters of conversation, punctuated by laughter and the clinking of champagne flutes. I moved through the crowd, accepting more congratulations, nodding at familiar faces, while positioning myself near the window that overlooked the bay. The window's reflection showed the entire living room, including the dimmer corner by the wine rack where Martin and Diana stood, 40 centimeters apart. I'd spent enough years measuring courtroom distances to estimate with precision. 40 centimeters, the distance of lovers deliberately attempting to appear unfamiliar. Martin said something low. His hand moved to Diana's elbow, fingers resting there with the casual intimacy of someone who'd touched that same elbow 1,000 times before. The contact lasted 1 full second longer than social etiquette permits. Diana smiled reflexively, not the practiced influencer smile from earlier, but something genuine and unguarded before catching herself and looking away. 40 centimeters. The distance of intimacy masked as professional courtesy. I calculated rapidly, the way I'd calculated evidence chains for 3 decades. If Diana and Martin were lovers, the timeline shifted completely. Martin Briggs had been dating my daughter for 3 years, engaged for 18 months. During that period, I'd granted him increasing access to family financial matters, first as Diana's future husband, then as someone I trusted with estate planning consultations. Every quarterly portfolio review, every trust fund adjustment, every discussion about Garrett Holdings' structure and the substantial assets Margaret and I had built. $97 million. That's what Martin had learned existed, documented across investments, property holdings, and the Long Island villa itself. And if Diana had been feeding him information even longer before their relationship became public, the infiltration could span 5 years or more. Martin's hand slid from Diana's elbow as they separated to different parts of the room, maintaining their careful illusion of distance. She moved toward a group of my former colleagues near the fireplace. He drifted toward the north window where guests discussed market volatility. Perfect choreography. Practiced. Rehearsed. The blacked-out name on the Queen's contract suddenly became obvious. Martin Briggs, attorney with 10 years of access to Harold Whitfield's political network and my family's financial infrastructure. The 2019 property transfer at 1247 Jamaica Avenue wasn't a single transaction. It was evidence of a pattern. How many other contracts existed with his name redacted? How many properties had been stripped using schemes he designed? 10 years. 10 years of Christmas dinners where Martin carved the turkey while planning to carve up everything I owned. 10 years of engagement celebrations and family gatherings where he studied our routines, our vulnerabilities, our trust. I lifted my champagne glass without drinking, watching both conspirators in the window's reflection. Diana laughed at something Thomas Bernard said, my former court clerk, retired now completely unaware he was standing 3 feet from someone plotting to drug her own father. Martin shook hands with Gerald Ashford, my former opposing counsel in a 2015 securities case, equally oblivious to the conspiracy unfolding in his presence. The audio file had 4 minutes, 17 seconds of content. I'd heard 31 seconds. 3 minutes, 46 seconds remained, but I already knew what those remaining minutes would contain: logistics, dosage calculations, account numbers, timeline confirmations, the mechanical details of betrayal. What I'd heard in the first 30 seconds was worse than logistics. I'd heard my daughter volunteer. Nobody forced Diana to say, "I just need to make sure Dad drinks from the right glass." Nobody coerced that sentence. She offered it with the casual ease of someone discussing dinner arrangements. For 10 years, I had granted Martin Briggs access to every account, every contract, every financial secret my family possessed. 10 years of trust built on the assumption that my daughter's judgment was sound, that her choice of partner reflected values Margaret and I had instilled. The question wasn't how much Martin had already taken. I would discover that later through forensic accounting and subpoenaed records. The question was how much more Martin believed he would take tonight. I stood watching Martin through the window's reflection, calculating how much more he believed he would take tonight. The answer would come sooner than he expected. Desmond appeared at 8:18 p.m., his face tight with urgency. He gestured toward the side hallway, the route to the back garden currently empty. I followed. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, plain white, unsealed. A woman in a catering uniform approached me from behind while I was getting water, slipped this into my hand and walked away before I could turn. I never even saw her face clearly. "Dark hair?" I asked. "Yes, around 29. Moved like she'd rehearsed the delivery." I opened the envelope. Inside, screenshot of a phone call log between two numbers. Metadata showed August 15th, 2024, 11:47 p.m. Duration 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Below that one transcribed sentence in bold, "Once Edward is out of the game, the entire Queen's file will vanish. I guarantee it." Caller ID Martin Briggs. Recipient Harold Whitfield's private cell, August 15th. 3 weeks after I purchased the burner phone. A handwritten note was clipped to the screenshot block letters in blue ink. "Queens 2019. Your dad knows. It's time." "Who is she, Dad?" Desmond asked. I folded the paper. "Someone who's been watching Martin and Whitfield longer than I have. Someone with access to phone records and the capability to intercept them. FBI, possibly. Or someone with a personal stake in seeing them prosecuted." I looked at my son. "The Queen's property transfer you brought earlier, 1247 Jamaica Avenue seller's name blacked out. This suggests that file contains evidence worth federal obstruction charges. They're going to destroy it. They believe they will. Once I'm out of the game, come to my study. There's something you need to understand." We walked through this crowd, nodding at guests. Diana stood near the fireplace with Thomas Bernard. Martin had moved to the south window. Harold remained at the east wall, his attention flicking repeatedly toward the wine rack. Choreography, patience, waiting. I locked the study door. Both envelopes lay on my desk, the Queen's contract and the phone log evidence of conspiracy spanning at least 5 years. "Do you know why I transferred $5 million out of the main Garrett Holdings account last week?" I asked. Desmond shook his head. "Because Martin has been monitoring those accounts for 10 years. He knows the quarterly balance, the investment allocations, which assets are liquid." I pulled up the account statement on my computer. This week's balance shows $92 million. A $5 million reduction Martin would interpret as normal portfolio rebalancing. "Where did it go?" "Into a Delaware limited liability company I established 3 months ago, through Howard Aldrich's firm, a law office Martin has never worked with and has no connection to. Aldrich filed the paperwork properly with full documentation. The company is legitimate in every respect." I opened the second screen displaying the LLC registration. Desmond leaned forward, reading. "Sterling Meridian Holdings," he said. "Registered agent in Wilmington. Manager listed as..." He stopped. "Martin R. Briggs." "Correct." "How?" "Martin submitted a signed proposal letter to me 3 months ago, a routine estate consultation document he sent to my personal email. In that letter, he proposed a Delaware holding structure using his management firm as the operational entity. He signed it. He initialed every page. He was proposing exactly this arrangement for his own benefit." I turned the screen toward Desmond. "Howard used that signed proposal as the authorization basis. Martin Briggs wrote his own name into this structure. Every signature is his, and every signature is genuine." Desmond stared at me. "He proposed the shell company that's going to trap him. He proposed the concept. I simply executed it before he could. The moment any transfer occurs from that account without my written authorization, Martin Briggs, as the named manager, whose signature appears on the original proposal, bears legal responsibility that no defense attorney can dismiss." "He walked into his own trap," Desmond said quietly. "Yes, and he doesn't know because he's focused on tonight's plan. He hasn't conducted his normal due diligence. Martin believes the poisoning and power of attorney will succeed before any audit matters. He thinks he has days or weeks to clean up loose ends. He doesn't realize the loose end is already tied around his neck. Martin Briggs thought he was the spider, but I had spent 3 months weaving a web with his own signature as the anchor thread. Desmond looked at both envelopes. The woman who gave me this, she knows you're setting traps. That's what her note means. It's time. Time to spring them. Correct. Which means someone inside their operation or adjacent to it wants them caught as badly as I do. Who? I'll find out later. Right now, return to the party. Act normal. Laugh. Drink. Be the dutiful son celebrating his father's retirement. I placed my hand on his shoulder. In approximately 40 minutes, things will accelerate. When they do, stay near the main door. Don't intervene. Trust that I've prepared for what's coming. He nodded and left the door closing quietly. I stood alone looking through the window at the dark courtyard beyond. Somewhere in that living room, Martin Briggs was drinking wine, not literally poisoned yet, but figuratively, the glass had been poured for him 3 months ago. The moment I first suspected, the moment I began setting traps, the moment I decided that if my daughter and her lover believed they could drug me, forge my signature, and steal everything Margaret and I built over 40 years, they would discover exactly how a federal judge conducts an investigation when his own family becomes the defendant. Tonight, those traps would close. I checked my watch, 8:31 p.m. 90 minutes remained until the scheduled end. But the real ending would come much sooner. I unlocked the door and walked back into the reception hall, my expression revealing nothing, my mind calculating the next 3 moves with the precision of 31 years on the bench. I walked back into the reception hall at 8:35 p.m., my mind calculating the next 3 moves. Martin believed he was winning. Whitfield believed the plan would execute smoothly. Diana believed her father remained ignorant. They were all wrong, but they wouldn't know until the trap closed. I had shaken Senator Harold Whitfield's hand once already tonight. The first greeting at 7:38 p.m. when he arrived, his palm clammy despite the cool room. But the second handshake, the one I would initiate at 8:38 p.m., would tell me everything the first had only suggested. I crossed the living room to where Whitfield stood with a cluster of political guests near the center, New York State Assemblyman Richard Fulton, and 2 aides whose names I didn't catch. Whitfield saw me approaching. His posture stiffened fractionally, the kind of micro-adjustment most people would miss. But a career spent reading defendants had trained me to recognize. Fear wears many masks. This one wore a smile. "Harold," I said, extending my hand. "I wanted to thank you personally for making time tonight. I know how demanding the Senate schedule can be." His handshake was firm, practiced the grip of someone who'd shaken 10,000 hands on campaign trails. But the dampness remained concentrated at the base of his thumb, where the thenar eminence meets the palm. Not environmental moisture. Not from holding a cold glass. This was physiological, produced by eccrine glands responding to signals from his autonomic nervous system. The body doesn't lie the way the mouth does. "Edward, the pleasure is entirely mine," Whitfield said, his voice carrying that practiced senatorial warmth. "Your career on the bench has been remarkable. New York will miss your wisdom." "You're kind to say so." I released his hand, maintaining eye contact, the way judges do when evaluating witness credibility. 31 years feels both too long and too short. But Margaret always said I'd know when it was time. At the mention of my late wife's name, something flickered in Whitfield's expression. Sympathy, guilt. The distinction mattered, but I couldn't isolate it in the brief moment before he recovered. "Margaret was a remarkable woman," he said. "I still remember the fundraiser she organized for the Children's Hospital. 20 years ago, she raised over $1 million in one evening." 1998, I confirmed. She had a gift for persuading people to open their wallets for good causes. We talked for 2 minutes about my judicial career, about memorable cases we'd worked together before my appointment to the bench, about the upcoming Senate session, and Whitfield's committee work. Pleasant conversation. The kind old friends have at retirement parties, but I was counting. 3 glances. In the span of our 2-minute conversation, Whitfield's eyes flicked toward the wine rack at the hallway's end exactly 3 times. Each glance lasted half a second, brief enough that someone not watching for it would miss the movement entirely. Each time he forced his attention back to my face, maintaining the illusion of focused engagement. A guilty man's body betrays him long before his mouth does. 31 years on the bench had taught me to read the sweat, the pulse at the throat, the micro-adjustments of posture that signal fear. Whitfield displayed all three. The wine rack held 24 bottles arranged in ascending price order, from the $40 table wines at the bottom to the $800 Bordeaux at the top. But Whitfield wasn't admiring the collection. He was monitoring it, checking, confirming something waited there. "The firm misses having you," Whitfield said, steering the conversation toward our shared history. Garrett and Whitfield won 73% of cases during our partnership. We were unbeatable. 39 wins out of 43 trials, I said. We made a good team. We did. He smiled, and for a moment I saw the man I'd known 30 years ago, the young attorney fresh from Columbia Law, hungry and brilliant, before whatever had corrupted him took root. Different times, different world. Indeed. I placed my hand on his shoulder, the gesture of old friendship. "Thank you for coming tonight, Harold. Let me bring you a special glass later, something I've been saving for honored guests." His smile widened. "That sounds wonderful. You always did have impeccable taste in wine." "I try." I squeezed his shoulder once, then released. "Enjoy the evening. We'll talk more later." He nodded, turning back to his political colleagues, and I moved toward the window overlooking the bay. My heart rate remained steady. My breathing stayed measured. To anyone watching, I'd just had a warm conversation with an old friend, but I'd accomplished exactly what I needed, planting the invitation. Pre-positioning the senator to accept the poisoned glass I would hand him when the moment arrived. Whitfield now expected me to bring him something special later. When I did, he would take it without hesitation, without suspicion, because I had framed it as honor rather than threat. Every successful trap requires two elements: bait the target wants, and a delivery method that appears benign. I'd just provided both. 3 glances, 2 minutes, 1 invitation, 0 awareness of the trap closing around him. The jazz quartet had shifted to Round Midnight, Thelonious Monk's melancholy masterpiece. All wrong notes, somehow making perfect sense. Appropriate music for an evening where everything appeared normal, but ran on undercurrents of conspiracy. I pulled a white linen handkerchief from my jacket pocket and wiped Whitfield's palm moisture from my own hand. The fabric absorbed the dampness, eccrine gland secretions, sodium chloride metabolic waste products, and the chemical signature of fear. Not admissible evidence in the traditional sense, but documentation nonetheless. I folded the handkerchief carefully, the damp section isolated in the center, and slipped it into my inner jacket pocket right beside the second phone and the recording device I'd checked earlier. Sometimes the smallest evidence speaks the loudest. Forensic analysis could date the moisture and confirm the stress hormones present in the secretion, establish that at 8:40 p.m. on Friday, September 13th, 2024, Senator Harold Whitfield's autonomic nervous system betrayed him. Sweat doesn't lie the way voices do. I checked my watch, 8:42 p.m. 78 minutes remained until the party's scheduled conclusion. But the real conclusion would come much sooner, in a moment I'd been preparing for since June. Diana stood near the fireplace, laughing with guests. Martin had moved to the north window. Whitfield returned to his political cluster at the center. 3 conspirators, 3 positions, all waiting for the signal I didn't yet see, but knew was coming. I walked toward the glass door overlooking Long Island Bay, positioning myself where I could watch the room's reflection while appearing to admire the night view. The water stretched dark beyond the villa's grounds, starlight caught on gentle waves. Everything was in position. Now I just needed to wait for Diana to make her move. I stood at the glass door overlooking Long Island Bay, everything in position. The handkerchief with Whitfield's sweat rested in my pocket beside the phone. 18 minutes until the 9 p.m. toast. Then the glass became a mirror at 8:42 p.m., and I watched my daughter's hand move for 3 seconds that would divide my life into before and after. Darkness had fallen completely over the bay, no moon yet, just starlight on black water transforming the glass door into a perfect reflecting surface. The entire living room displayed behind me chandelier guests, and the wine rack 4 meters to my left, where 24 bottles waited. Diana moved into the reflection's frame. She lifted a deep red Bordeaux glass with her left hand, as if examining the wine's color against the light. A gesture any oenophile might make completely natural, drawing no attention. Her right hand moved with different purpose. 3 seconds. I counted them the way I'd counted evidence presentation times for 31 years. 3 seconds during which her right hand reached into her clutch bag, extracted something small and white, a packet powder-sized, and emptied its contents into the crimson liquid, while her left hand tilted the glass slightly. The powder vanished almost invisibly, no visible residue, no color change, no telltale cloudiness. Professional, practiced, precise. She placed the glass at the front of the wine rack, not randomly, but specifically at the position where I always stood when addressing family gatherings, where servers knew to retrieve my glass first during toasts. Then Diana turned back to the guests, her smile absolutely unchanged, as if those 3 seconds never happened. I have looked at defendants in that same way across decades of criminal proceedings and known who was guilty. Not from their words, words are carefully prepared, rehearsed. I knew by watching their hands, the way fingers moved when claiming innocence, the surgical precision that revealed premeditation. Tonight, I looked at my daughter's hands in the glass reflection, and I knew. I remained motionless, my face still toward the bay, my reflection visible to anyone who glanced my way, a man contemplating retirement, nothing more. But my mind had shifted into the mode 31 years on the bench had trained evidence analysis, threat assessment, tactical response. 10 seconds. A judge counts to 10 before ruling on an objection, because immediate reaction is always wrong. Emotion produces bad law. Panic produces bad decisions. So I counted. 1. The glass now contained an unknown substance placed there by my daughter. 2. I had no verified physical evidence, only eyewitness testimony from a single observer. 3. That glass would be handed to me at the toast in exactly 18 minutes. 4. Senator Whitfield stood approximately 3 meters from the wine rack. 5. I had already invited Whitfield to accept a special glass from me. 6. The switch was possible if executed correctly. 7. But one question remained unanswered. There are moments that cleave a life in two, a diagnosis, a death, a phone call in the night. And then there are moments like this, watching your child become someone you never imagined. 3 seconds reflected in glass that showed you everything and explained nothing. 8. The recording device had captured Diana's voice saying, "I just need to make sure Dad drinks from the right glass." 9. But that same recording included her asking, "And you're certain the dosage won't," before Whitfield interrupted with non-lethal 4 to 6 hours of incapacitation, 10 which meant Diana had asked about safety, had expressed concern, had been told the substance was non-lethal. The question I could not answer. Did Diana know exactly what was in that powder packet? Martin Briggs had 10 years of access to my family, my finances, my trust. If Martin told Diana the packet contained a digestive irritant, something that would make me ill enough to leave early, allowing privacy for documents, would Diana have believed him? Would she have understood that non-lethal could mean many things, depending on dosage, health conditions, drug interactions? Or had Martin told her the complete truth, and Diana accepted it anyway? I have sentenced men to decades in prison on evidence weaker than what I just witnessed. But those men were not the child I held at 3 days old, the girl who asked me why the sky was blue, the young woman who called me Dad, until Martin Briggs taught her different arithmetic. Those men were not Diana. The jazz quartet played My Foolish Heart, Bill Evans' haunting ballad about love and loss, and the mistakes we make believing we understand the people closest to us. 18 minutes remained until the toast. 18 minutes to decide whether I would execute the switch I'd planned, handing my clean glass to Whitfield while positioning myself to take the poisoned one. 18 minutes to determine if I was protecting my daughter from her own conspiracy or protecting her from being Martin's unknowing weapon. 18 minutes to choose between the father who raised Diana for 28 years and the judge who had just witnessed premeditated assault. Behind me, the party continued. Laughter, conversation, clinking champagne flutes. 80 guests celebrating my retirement, with no awareness that 4 meters to their left, a wine glass weighted with contents that would either incapacitate me for 6 hours or do something worse Diana might not understand she'd agreed to. I turned from the glass door at 8:42 and 30 seconds, my expression revealing nothing my decision made. If Diana was Martin's knowing accomplice, the glass switch would expose her. If Diana was Martin's deceived pawn, the switch would protect her from discovering what she'd truly done. Either way, I would not drink what my daughter had poured, but I would make certain someone else did. I checked the room's positions one final time in the glass reflection. Diana near the fireplace, Martin at the north window, Whitfield at center. 3 conspirators waiting for the 9 p.m. signal. None of them knew I'd already changed the outcome. I walked toward Harold Whitfield carrying my own untouched champagne glass. The promised special glass delivery, about to become something none of them anticipated. I made my decision. In the 11 seconds it took to walk from the glass door to where Senator Whitfield stood, sometimes justice requires a judge to become both prosecutor and executioner in the same breath. My own wine glass remained in my right hand untouched, since a server had handed it to me an hour earlier. Clean. Safe. Exactly what I would give to the man who'd conspired to poison me. I crossed 6 meters of crowded living room, navigating past clusters of guests toward Whitfield at the room's center, with Richard Fulton and 2 Senate aides. He saw me approaching. His posture shifted fractionally, the same micro-adjustment I'd noted earlier. "Harold," I said, stopping directly in front of him with gracious warmth. "I did promise to bring you something special." I walked to the wine rack, first 4 meters of crowded living room, navigating past clusters of guests with the casual ease of a man retrieving his own wine. The poisoned glass sat at the front of the red section, exactly where Diana had placed it. Exactly where I always stood during family toasts. My hand moved directly to it without hesitation. I lifted it, turned, and crossed back to where Whitfield stood with Richard Fulton and 2 Senate aides. He saw me approaching. His posture shifted fractionally, the same micro-adjustment I'd noted earlier. "Hi, Harold." I presented the glass with both hands, a gesture of respect, visible to all 80 guests. Burgundy 2015. I saved this for the most honored guest tonight. 30 years of partnership deserves nothing less. Whitfield's smile broadened. He accepted the glass with both hands, mirroring my gesture. "Judge, you are too generous. This is exceptional." "Enjoy it," I replied. "I'll find another for myself shortly." I retrieved a clean glass from the serving tray a nearby server carried, tilting at once in a private toast that no one noticed. A chess master once told me that the best move is the one your opponent never sees coming, not because it's hidden, but because it looks so natural they forget to look for it at all. I stood in the center of the living room holding my daughter's poisoned glass. Behind me, Senator Harold Whitfield raised my clean wine to his lips and drank. Around us, 80 guests laughed and talked, completely unaware that an arrow had just been fired without making a sound. The jazz quartet continued playing. Conversations flowed. Nothing had changed in the room's atmosphere, yet everything had inverted beneath the surface. I positioned myself near the fireplace where I could observe the entire space. Diana remained at the east wall, her attention flicking repeatedly toward me, checking, monitoring, waiting. Martin had moved to the north window, keeping Whitfield in peripheral vision. The choreography continued exactly as they'd rehearsed, except the lead actor had switched roles without telling the directors. At 8:55 p.m., the catering manager approached me with a wireless microphone. "Mr. Garrett, whenever you're ready for the toast." "Give me 5 minutes," I said. 9 o'clock exactly. I checked positions one final time. Whitfield stood 20 feet to my left, his face showing no distress yet. Desmond stood near the main entrance, as I'd instructed, watching me with tension. At 9 p.m. sharp, the ambient lighting dimmed slightly, and the chandelier's intensity increased. 80 guests turned toward me expectantly, conversations trailing off, champagne flutes rising. Diana moved through the crowd toward me, her path bringing her within 3 feet of where I stood. Her face showed momentary confusion as her eyes tracked the wine glass already in my hand. She recovered instantly, improvising with practiced skill. "Happy birthday, Dad," she said, presenting empty hands with a slight bow. "That's the wine I personally selected for you tonight." She gestured gracefully to the glass in my grip, incorporating the unexpected into her narrative. I held her gaze for 3 full seconds, long enough that she couldn't read anything in the judicial mask I'd worn for 31 years. Then I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Diana. Your thoughtfulness means everything." I raised the glass toward the assembled guests. 80 flutes rose in response, crystal catching chandelier light. "To retirement," I said. "To family. To justice, which arrives in its own time on its own terms." "To justice," the room echoed back. I brought the glass to my lips, tilting it, as if drinking deeply. The poisoned wine touched my closed mouth. I felt the liquid's coolness, tasted the Bordeaux's tannins on my lips, but I allowed nothing to pass the barrier of my teeth. The glass lowered. I smiled at the assembled guests while wiping my mouth with a napkin. The gesture natural, concealing that not a single drop had entered my body. There is a particular cruelty in watching someone you love believe they are winning while you dismantle them, not the hot cruelty of anger, but the cold kind that comes from necessity, from having no choice left but to let them reveal themselves completely. Diana watched me with the eyes of someone waiting for something to happen. Her shoulders held tension, the waiting, the monitoring, the anticipation of symptoms beginning within minutes. I smiled at my daughter across the crowded room, and she smiled back. Her relief showed in the slight relaxation of her posture, the way her hand released tension it had been holding since 6:15 p.m. She believed the hardest part was done. She believed the poison was in my system and the countdown had begun. She believed she was watching my last conscious hour before the drug would take effect, allowing Martin and Whitfield to execute the document signing. She had no idea that 8 minutes from now, Senator Harold Whitfield would grip a chair for support, and the entire room would understand that someone had made a terrible mistake about which glass was which. I set the poisoned glass down on a side table, having accomplished what I needed, allowing Diana to believe her plan had succeeded, while ensuring the evidence of conspiracy would manifest in the person who deserved it. The party continued around us. Guests resumed conversations. The jazz quartet shifted to "In a Sentimental Mood." Servers cleared empty plates and refreshed drinks. And somewhere in that room, Whitfield's body was beginning to process whatever substance Diana had put in that glass, substance he'd told her was non-lethal. 4 to 6 hours of incapacitation, enough time for signatures, but not enough to raise medical suspicion. We would all discover together in approximately 8 minutes whether Harold Whitfield had told Diana the truth. 8 minutes after the toast, Diana believed the poison was working through my system. She didn't know it was working through someone else's. Senator Harold Whitfield's hand found the chair arm at 9:08 p.m., and the way his fingers gripped the mahogany told everyone watching that something had gone terribly, irrevocably wrong. Blake Harrison saw it first. Whitfield's bodyguard for 6 years, Harrison knew his clients, tells the grip that meant crisis, the glaze in the eyes that meant get help now. He moved immediately to Whitfield's side, one hand on the senator's elbow, the other already reaching for his phone. "Sir, are you all right?" Harrison's voice cut through the ambient conversation. Whitfield tried to respond. His mouth opened. Words formed but came out slow, blurred, disconnected from the sentences his brain was attempting to construct. I feel—" The words dissolved into incoherence. His vision must have been failing, because his eyes lost focus, pupils dilating, despite the bright chandelier overhead. The room tilted for him. I could see it in the way his weight shifted suddenly, the way Harrison had to brace harder to keep him upright. Gerald Ashford, standing 3 feet away, saw it too. "Someone call 911. The senator needs help." The party fractured instantly. Conversations dropped to urgent whispers. Guests moved back, creating space. Several people pulled out phones. The jazz quartet stopped mid-phrase, saxophone trailing off into silence. I stood motionless, at my position, near the fireplace, watching the chaos unfold, with the same judicial composure I'd maintained for 31 years. But my attention wasn't on Whitfield. It was on Martin Briggs. Martin stood at the north window, his body frozen in the moment of recognition. His eyes tracked from the collapsing Whitfield to my hand still holding the supposedly poisoned glass, then up to meet my gaze across the chaotic room. For 1 second, we held that stare. No words, no gestures, just two men understanding that tonight had ended differently than either had calculated. Martin's face showed the instant comprehension of someone who'd just realized the chessboard had been rotated while he wasn't looking. He knew. In that single second, Martin Briggs knew I'd switched the glasses. 8 minutes. That's how long it took for a conspiracy years in the making to collapse into chaos. The length of time between a toast and a 911 call, between certainty and ruin. Whitfield's knees buckled. Harrison lowered him to the floor, supporting his head, speaking urgently into his phone. "Unconscious male, 50s, possible poisoning, Garrett Villa, 412 Shore Road, Oyster Bay." Diana appeared at the edge of the crowd, her face showing confusion, raw, genuine confusion that I recognized as authentic, because it didn't match the practiced expressions I'd seen all evening. She looked at Whitfield on the floor, then at me, still standing with the wineglass, then at Martin across the room. The calculation happened behind her eyes. I watched it process. Whitfield collapsed. Edward still upright. The glass switched somehow. The plan inverted. Then something else crossed her face, something colder, more deliberate, and I understood that Diana was making a decision about what to do next. Nassau County Police arrived 7 minutes later, Officers Brennan and Valdez responding to the 911 call about a medical emergency that might involve criminal poisoning. Brennan, a 15-year veteran, with the weathered face of someone who'd seen too many family party disasters, took control of the scene immediately, while paramedics worked on Whitfield. "Everyone stay where you are," Brennan announced. "We need statements from anyone who saw what happened." Diana stepped forward before anyone else could speak. Tears fell down her face at precisely calibrated speed, not too fast, not too slow, the rhythm of genuine distress perfected over decades. Her voice broke in exactly the right places. "Officers," she said, moving toward them with trembling hands. "My brother Desmond. He's been jealous because Dad is about to change his will. I think he put something in the wine to embarrass Dad in front of all the guests." She pointed at Desmond, who stood near the main entrance, exactly where I'd told him to position himself hours ago. His face showed shock, pure, unfiltered shock, as 80 pairs of eyes turned toward him. Diana moved to Desmond's side with the confidence of someone who'd pre-positioned evidence. Her hand reached into his jacket pocket before he could react, pulling out a familiar amber plastic bottle, my supplement bottle, the one that should have been sitting on my study desk. The one Diana must have taken hours ago when she arrived early to prepare. The one containing the recording device. She placed it in Officer Brennan's hand, with a trembling grip, tears still flowing. "I found this in his pocket when we came inside. I didn't want to believe my brother could do something like this, but..." Her voice broke perfectly. The tears fell beautifully. The performance was flawless. Desmond stared at the bottle in the officer's hand, his face showing the confusion of someone who'd just been framed by a master. "That's not," he started. "Sir, please stay calm." Officer Valdez said, the younger officer's hand moving reflexively toward his belt. "We're going to need you to answer some questions. I have sentenced criminals who cried in court. Some genuine, some performed and developed an internal meter I thought was reliable. But standing there watching my daughter manufacture tears while framing her brother, I understood I'd never truly tested that meter on the person it mattered most for. My daughter cries beautifully. I have watched her cry since she was 3 years old, skinned knees, lost toys, teenage heartbreaks, Margaret's funeral. And for 28 years, I never knew for sure when it was real and when it wasn't. Until tonight. Tonight, I finally understood Diana had been performing her entire life, and I'd been the primary audience who never realized he was watching theater instead of truth. The supplement bottle sat in Officer Brennan's evidence glove, amber plastic, catching the chandelier light. Diana didn't know it contained a recording device. Didn't know that 4 minutes and 17 seconds of audio would eventually play in a courtroom, her voice saying, "I just need to make sure Dad drinks from the right glass." She'd just handed the police the evidence that would convict her while crying and blaming someone else. The question wasn't when the performance had begun. The question was whether it had ever stopped. Diana's performance had stopped mid-tears when she saw the officer's attention turn. But before they could question Desmond further, I placed my hand on my son's shoulder at 9:20 p.m. and stepped into the circle with the authority of a career spent reading defendants had trained me to recognize. Tonight, Desmond would not be framed. I positioned myself between my son and the two officers, my hand firm on Desmond's shoulder, and spoke in the clear courtroom voice that once silenced entire galleries. "Officers, I am Edward Garrett, former Justice of the New York State Supreme Court, bar number NY-47829. I kept my eyes on Officer Brennan. Desmond has nothing to do with anything that happened tonight. I am the one who moved my wine glass to Senator Whitfield's position." Brennan's expression shifted recognition of my name, recalibration of the situation. "I observed someone approach my glass prior to the toast," I continued. "I have evidence documenting tonight's events. I will cooperate fully with your investigation." Officers Brennan and Valdez exchanged a glance. Brennan pulled out his notebook. "Judge Garrett, you're saying you witnessed tampering?" "Correct. And I have recording evidence that will clarify the chain of events." Across the room, Martin Briggs closed his eyes for half a second, just long enough for me to register it. Diana's tears had stopped completely. Her face showed only calculation now, as she processed what my statement meant, what evidence I might possess, how the narrative had just inverted beyond her control. "We'll need formal statements from everyone involved," Brennan said. "Judge, are you willing to come to the station tomorrow?" "Absolutely. My attorney, Howard Aldrich, can arrange timing." Brennan nodded. "Mr. Garrett," he said to Desmond, "you're free to go. We may have follow-up questions later." Desmond's shoulders released tension he'd been holding since Diana pulled the supplement bottle from his pocket. The party dissolved after that. Guests filed out with urgent whispers. Paramedics had taken Whitfield to Nassau University Medical Center 20 minutes earlier, Blake Harrison riding in the ambulance. At 9:45 p.m., as the last guests departed, Martin Briggs walked the same direction I was heading toward the study hallway with calculated coincidence. He closed the door behind us before speaking, his voice calibrated to be inaudible beyond 3 meters. "Edward, things went badly tonight." His tone carried practiced reasonableness. "Let me help you handle this discreetly. Whitfield isn't someone you want as an enemy right now. There are smoother ways to resolve this." I met his eyes with a career's worth of judicial experience compressed into one look. "Martin, you have been my lawyer for 10 years, I said quietly. "Do you know what phrase I used to say most often in the courtroom?" His silence was answer enough. "Evidence waits for no one," I said, "and I have too much of it to wait. 10 years of trust. 10 years of access to every account, every contract, every family secret. and it ended in a hallway with a man walking away without saying goodbye. Martin's face showed the moment of recognition, not surprise but acceptance that a game had ended and he'd lost. He nodded once, turned, and walked down the hallway toward the main entrance. For the first time in a decade, he left without scheduling our next meeting. Because both men understood there would never be a next meeting. The sound of his shoes on the stone floor faded into silence. At 11 p.m., the villa was nearly empty. The catering staff had left. The police had gone. Diana had retreated to her second-floor room without speaking to anyone. Desmond and I sat on opposite sides of a fireplace that had died out hours ago, only a dim yellow reading lamp providing light. A glass of water sat untouched on the side table. The September night pressed against the window's Long Island Bay, invisible in the darkness beyond. Desmond's voice came small and careful, carrying weight he'd held for years. "Dad, there's something I've wanted to ask for a long time." He paused. "Diana isn't your biological daughter, is she?" I remained silent long enough that Desmond knew the answer before I spoke. Then I nodded slowly. "Since Diana was 3 years old," I said. "A DNA test I commissioned privately through a medical laboratory in 2004. The results have been sealed at Howard Aldrich's office ever since." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I looked into the cold fireplace, seeing ash that had once been oak logs Margaret selected. "There are truths you keep from your children, not because they're too young to understand, but because once spoken, they can never be unspoken. And you spend decades hoping you'll never need to speak them until the night you do." "Because it wasn't Diana's fault," I said. "A child doesn't choose their parents. Your mother and I decided that love was a choice we made daily, not a verdict delivered by genetics." I paused. "But an adult chooses how to treat those around them. Diana made her choice tonight." Desmond said nothing more, and we sat in silence by the dead fireplace. The kind of silence that follows when you learn your family was never what you thought it was. Outside the window, Long Island Bay lay flat and black beneath the September night sky. No stars visible through the cloud cover. No moon yet risen. Just darkness stretching toward the horizon. Tomorrow would be a very long day. Tonight had only exposed the conspiracy, the recording device in police custody, Whitfield hospitalized with whatever substance Diana had believed was non-lethal, Martin walking away, knowing his decade of infiltration had ended. Tomorrow we would have to dismantle it piece by piece, and I wasn't certain yet which would be harder, facing the enemies I'd identified, or protecting the daughter who'd tried to destroy me while still not understanding whether she'd known the full truth of what she was doing. The clock on the mantel showed 11:47 p.m. In 13 hours, Martin would return with one final desperate play. But tonight, for now, I sat with my son in the darkness and let the weight of everything that had happened settle into the silence between us. Tomorrow came at 9:55 a.m. on Saturday morning, and it brought Martin Briggs carrying brown leather-bound documents and the audacity of a man who believed he could still win. 12 hours had passed since his conspiracy collapsed. 12 hours since he'd watched Whitfield collapse from the poison meant for me. 12 hours since he'd looked across that chaotic room and understood I'd switched the glasses. And yet here he stood at my breakfast room door, briefcase in hand, as if nothing fundamental had changed between us. Diana already sat at the oak table, her hands wrapped around an untouched coffee cup, her eyes carrying the exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept. She looked up when Martin entered, her expression unreadable, neither welcoming nor hostile, just waiting. Martin poured himself coffee from the sideboard, with the ease of 10 years' familiarity, as if he still belonged in this house, as if he hadn't spent the previous evening attempting to orchestrate my incapacitation. He sat at the table across from me and slid the leather-bound documents forward. "Edward, after last night's incident with Harold, I'm worried for you," he said, his voice carrying practiced concern. "Whitfield's lawyers could counterattack, claiming you intentionally poisoned him. They could file civil suits, freeze assets, tie everything up in litigation for years." I said nothing. Let him talk. Let him build his case. This power of attorney transfers operational control of Garrett Holdings to Diana temporarily. He continued. You retain all income streams, all ownership. It just shields the assets from litigation risk while we sort out the criminal investigation. Standard protective measure. He pushed the documents closer. I picked up the document set and began reading from page 1 with the methodical pace I'd learned across 31 years, the pace that had saved me from signing bad contracts, approving flawed plea deals, accepting settlements that looked good until you read Clause 17. The devil lives in clause structure. Always has, always will. Page 1 outlined the basic power transfer. Diana Garrett granted operational authority over Garrett Holdings, effective upon signature. Standard language, nothing immediately alarming. Page 2, detailed compensation structures. Diana would receive standard trustee fees of 2% annually. Reasonable for estate management. Page 3 covered decision-making protocols, all major decisions required. Written consent from both Diana and the named legal advisor Martin Briggs, naturally. I have read thousands of contracts in 31 years, partnership agreements, trusts, divorce settlements, and I learned early that the most important clause is always the one the other party wants you to skip. Martin shifted in his chair. Barely perceptible, just a slight adjustment of posture that told me he was waiting, watching, hoping I'd sign before reaching the pages that mattered. I turned to page 4, slowly running my finger down the legal text with the same deliberation I'd used reading appellate briefs. Then I stopped. My index finger rested on a specific clause, and I felt the weight of what Martin had tried to hide in plain sight, using the language of legitimacy. Clause 7b. I said, my voice flat and prosecutorial. After 90 days from signing, all management rights transfer automatically to the Martin Briggs Trust, LLC, not Diana Garrett. I looked at Diana's face before looking at Martin. In that half-second, I watched her expression shift from tense alliance to confused betrayal. Her hands released the coffee cup. She reached for the documents, flipping frantically to page 4, her eyes scanning the legal text I'd just quoted. Martin started explaining with the smooth lawyer voice he'd perfected over 2 decades. That's just an optimal tax structure for estate planning, he said. Diana would still benefit from... Martin? I cut through his explanation with judicial precision. My daughter just finished reading Clause 7b. Look at her face. Diana looked up from the document, her eyes moving from the legal language to Martin's face. And in that moment, I watched her understand what I'd understood months ago. She was never Martin's partner. She was his stepping stone, his access point, his temporary necessity. 90 days. That's how long Martin believed he needed Diana to maintain appearances, to consolidate control, to execute the paperwork that would give him everything. After that, Clause 7b would activate automatically. No renewal required. No Diana required. You were going to take it all, Diana said quietly. From both of us. Martin Briggs built his scheme like a house of cards. Each person a supporting card, believing they were the foundation, until the moment they discovered they were just another card waiting to fall. Diana, you're misunderstanding the legal structure, Martin tried again. I'm not misunderstanding anything, she said, her voice harder now. Clause 7b is clear. 90 days after Dad signs this, you get everything. I get nothing. She turned the document toward Martin, stabbing her finger at the clause. When were you going to tell me? She asked. Day 89. Or were you just going to disappear after securing the signatures? Martin had no prepared response. Harvard Law had taught him how to manipulate contracts, how to read opposing counsel, how to win negotiations. But it hadn't taught him what to say when the woman he'd been sleeping with for 3 years discovered she was expendable. I watched the most dangerous realization settle across Diana's face. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the one with a plan, it's the one who just discovered the plan wasn't meant for them. You never loved me, Diana said. Not a question. A statement of fact. Martin stood gathering the documents with hands that moved slightly too fast, betraying the composure he was trying to maintain. I should go, he said. Give you both time to think this through clearly. Martin, I said as he reached the door, don't come back to this house. He paused, his back to me, then continued walking without turning around. Diana stared at the document in her hands, page 4, clause 7b, the legal language that proved Martin Briggs had never loved her, only needed her access to the family fortune for exactly 90 days. The man who had manipulated a 28-year-old woman into poisoning her own father was himself a pawn in his own game. And he'd just been checkmated by the judge he'd spent 10 years studying and still completely misunderstood. Diana stared at clause 7b for a full minute after Martin walked toward the door, the document trembling slightly in her hands. 90 days. That's all she'd been worth to him. I sat across from her, watching my daughter process betrayal in real time. 28 years I'd protected her from one truth, only to watch her discover another. The man she loved had never loved her back. Then Desmond entered through the side door carrying Margaret's leather-bound diary, and I knew the protection was about to end. The diary was small, 6 inches by 8, dark brown leather, with Margaret's name embossed in faded gold on the cover. I recognized it instantly. The private journal she'd kept on her bedside table, the one I thought had been destroyed after her funeral 2 years ago. "Dad," Desmond said, his voice uncertain, "I found this in the attic lockbox. The key was in your study drawer." He held it out toward me, but Martin's voice came from the hallway before I could respond. "What is that?" Martin stepped back into the breakfast room, his earlier retreat apparently incomplete. His eyes fixed on the diary with the instinct of a lawyer who'd just spotted potential evidence. Desmond hesitated. "Mom's journal, from when Diana and I were kids." "That's family property," Martin said, moving toward Desmond. "Diana has legal right as Margaret's daughter. Let me see it." I watched Martin's calculation running behind his eyes, looking for leverage, for ammunition, for anything that might salvage his collapsed scheme. Desmond glanced at me. I nodded once. Sometimes you have to let the truth reveal itself through other people's mouths. Desmond handed the diary to Martin, who immediately began flipping through pages with the focused intensity of someone searching for specific keywords. He found a marked entry dated August 1996, the bookmark still in place after 28 years. Martin's expression shifted as he read silently. Then he began reading aloud, his voice carrying that lawyer's precision that turns private words into public evidence. "Edward finally told me the truth about Diana's father today," Martin read. "She was 3 when I married him already, calling me Mama, never knowing I wasn't her biological mother. He asked if I was certain I wanted to raise another woman's child. I told him I was certain I wanted to raise our daughter. Your mother knew that before any of us did, love is a choice we make every morning." The room went completely silent. Diana's face drained of what little color remained from earlier. Her breathing stopped for 3 full seconds before resuming in shallow gasps. Martin continued reading, his voice sharpening with realization. "Edward worries that someday she'll resent us for not telling her. But how do you tell a child that the woman who tucked her in every night, who sang her lullabies, who held her when she cried, isn't connected to her by blood? You don't. You just love her like you would any daughter, and you hope that's enough." Martin looked up from the diary, his eyes moving from Diana to Desmond to me. The calculation was visible, piecing together implications, inheritance law, biological claims. "Wait," he said slowly, looking directly at Diana. "If Margaret wasn't your biological mother, then you and Desmond aren't actually blood siblings." He paused, letting that sink in. "Which means Desmond has no legal claim to Garrett Holdings whatsoever. Diana, you're the only legitimate heir." Martin smiled. Diana didn't smile back. She was staring at me, waiting for confirmation or denial, her world tilting on an axis she'd never known existed. Desmond said quietly, "That doesn't make sense. Mom Margaret always said I had Dad's eyes." Martin laughed. "Stepson genetics don't work that way, kid." I watched Martin weaponize Margaret's words, twisting her confession, Mom, into something she never intended. He thought he'd found leverage against Desmond. He thought he could eliminate the competition for Diana's inheritance. He was wrong. Before I reveal the DNA truth, Margaret and I protected for 28 years. Are you still with me? Comment A. If Diana deserves to know this secret, or B, if some truths should stay buried forever. Add one short reason why. Please note what follows includes dramatized details for emotional impact, though the core lesson remains. I stood slowly, my hands flat on the oak table. My voice came quiet, precise, final. The voice I'd used for 31 years when delivering verdicts that would reshape lives. DNA test, I said. Howard Aldrich's office, November 2004. Desmond is my biological son with Margaret. Diana, you are Margaret's child from before our marriage. I've known since you were 3 years old. Margaret confessed everything the week before the wedding. I chose to raise you as my daughter anyway. The silence that followed was absolute. Diana's face drained of what little color remained. Her breathing stopped completely. Her hands gripped the edge of the table with white-knuckled desperation. Martin's calculation visibly stalled his mind, recalibrating everything he'd just said, everything he'd planned, everything he'd believed about this family's structure. Desmond froze mid-breath, his eyes wide, processing what I'd just declared. 28 years of family history reframed in 30 seconds. Diana's obsession with the inheritance, never about greed, always about proving she belonged. Desmond's legitimacy, not stepson charity, but blood right. Martin's conspiracy manipulation of a stepdaughter's identity crisis. Everything made sense now. Everything was broken now. Diana found her voice hollow and distant. You let me spend 28 years believing I was a Garrett, she whispered. Believing this fortune was my birthright. And you gave Desmond everything anyway. I met her eyes across the table. I gave Desmond nothing he didn't earn, I said. You had the same 28 years to choose love over entitlement. Margaret did. You didn't. The room's temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Diana's entire self-concept collapsed in real time. Everything she'd believed about herself, her place in the family, her right to the fortune, all built on a premise that had never been true. She'd spent 3 decades trying to prove herself worthy of a name that was never hers by blood, while Desmond, whom she'd tried to frame for murder, was the true biological heir all along. Diana's hand moved slowly toward the credenza behind her, where a steak knife still lay from the catering cleanup, Martin's backup weapon from Friday night, cataloged by police but not yet collected. For the first time since September 13th, I felt actual fear. Diana's hand moved toward the steak knife. Desmond stepped forward instantly, placing himself between her and the weapon. I stayed seated, watching my daughter's face, but the rage I expected never came. Instead, her hand dropped. She picked up Margaret's diary from the table and walked to the corner chair without a word. After midnight, when the house had quieted, I had placed the diary in the attic lockbox, the fireproof safe Margaret used for documents she wanted preserved. I left the key where Desmond would find it if he looked. I wasn't certain he would look. He was thorough that way. 2 hours later, she sat alone in the breakfast room, with the diary open to a page dated August 1996, the summer she turned 3. And for the first time in 28 years, she made no sound at all. Desmond stood in the doorway watching her, his posture tense with the uncertainty of someone who didn't know whether to stay or leave. Diana hadn't moved in 40 minutes. Just sat there with the diary open on her lap, her eyes fixed on Margaret's handwriting. "Do you want me to leave?" Desmond asked finally. Diana didn't look up. She wrote about loving me. Every page. 28 years of her loving someone else's mistake. "You weren't a mistake," Desmond said. "Dad chose your father," Diana interrupted, her voice flat. "Not mine." She turned a page slowly. Read silently. Her finger traced a line of Margaret's precise, slanted handwriting. She stopped at one entry, reading it twice, then 3 times before finally closing the diary. She pushed it across the small table toward Desmond, without speaking, stood and walked out of the breakfast room. No tears, no rage, nothing, just silence. Desmond found me in the study 30 minutes later, the diary in his hands. "Dad, I don't know what to do," he said. "She's not crying. She's not yelling. She's just gone." I looked up from the documents I'd been reviewing, the Sterling Meridian Holdings LLC paperwork that would eventually serve as evidence against Martin. "Did she cry?" I asked. "No, that's what scared me. She just stopped." I nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's worse." "What page did she stop at longest?" Desmond opened the diary carefully, finding the marked page. "This one. August 17th, 1996. He handed it to me. I recognized Margaret's handwriting immediately, the entry she'd written 3 days before our wedding, the one I'd read 100 times after she died. "Today, Edward asked if I was certain about raising Diana as my own," I read aloud. "Not his daughter, not our daughter, but mine, because he knows the choice is mine to make. I told him I've never been more certain of anything." The entry Margaret had written was the one I'd memorized across 2 years of grief. "I choose Diana. I will choose her every morning for the rest of my life. I will choose her every morning for the rest of my life." I closed the diary. "Your mother wrote that entry the night I proposed," I said. "She wanted proof she'd chosen love over biology. Diana just learned the woman who loved her that completely wasn't obligated by blood and still chose her anyway. What does it mean to discover the woman who loved you most, had no biological reason to do so, and you repaid that choice with poison? Then why did Diana spend 28 years trying to destroy us?" Desmond asked. I had no answer for that. Not one that would satisfy him. Not one that would satisfy me. My phone rang at 1 p.m. Unknown number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, then answered. "Mr. Garrett." A woman's voice, unfamiliar. "You don't know me, but I know what your wife and son-in-law did, because mine did it first to my father." I sat forward in my chair. "Who is this?" "Claire Morgan, Robert Morgan's daughter, 1247 Jamaica Avenue, Queens, 2019. The address from the envelope Desmond had brought me Friday night. The property transfer with Martin's signature and the blacked-out second name. "You sent the envelopes," I said. "The audio file, the shell company records, everything you needed to understand what Martin Briggs has been doing for years." Her voice was calm, controlled. "Martin Briggs keeps everything, Mr. Garrett. You just need to know where he hides it." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because my father lost everything in 2019. Martin and Senator Whitfield stripped his property using fraudulent contracts. My father died broke in March 2021. Heart attack brought on by stress, the doctors said. I call it murder by paperwork. The caller ID said unknown. The voice said I sent the envelopes. I got hired at Briggs Capital 8 months ago," Claire continued. "Used my married name Claire Dennison. Martin never connected me to Robert Morgan. I've been documenting everything since June. Every contract, every shell company, every fraudulent transfer. Your recording device captured conversations I couldn't access. Together we have enough to destroy him. Why wait until now? Because I needed you to understand what you were facing. I needed you to set your own traps, gather your own evidence. If I'd approached you directly in June, you might not have believed me. But now you've seen it yourself. Now you're ready to act." She was right. If a stranger had contacted me with accusations against Martin and Harold 6 months ago, I would have been skeptical. Now I had audio recordings, financial documentation, and witnessed conspiracy. "Justice arrives slow, Mr. Garrett," Claire said. "But it arrives. What do you want from me?" "Nothing. I want you to know Martin keeps a second office. Not the one downtown, a storage unit in Astoria registered under his mother's maiden name. Everything you need is in locker 237. Financial records going back 10 years. Contracts with forged signatures. The complete Queens property network. All of it. How do I access it? The code is your wife's birthday, month, day, year. Martin used Margaret's information for his operational security because he thought you'd never look. He was wrong. The line disconnected. I sat in the study holding my phone processing what Claire Morgan had just revealed. Martin had been documenting his own crimes for a decade, storing them in a location he thought was secure, using my dead wife's birthday as the access code. And a dead man's daughter had spent 8 months learning exactly where. Desmond stood waiting. "Dad, who was that?" "Someone who's been hunting the same people we are," I said. "Someone who started hunting them 4 years before I did." My phone rang at 3 p.m. Martin Briggs, not blocked, not hiding, and the first words were, "I've consulted a psychiatric expert about your behavior over the past 48 hours, and we both agree you're showing signs of cognitive decline." I didn't answer immediately. Let him hear the silence. "Paranoid accusations," Martin continued, voice smooth as courtroom testimony. "Disrupting a charity event. Fabricating conspiracy theories about your own daughter. These are textbook indicators, Edward. Article 81 of the New York Mental Hygiene Law allows concerned family members to petition for a competency evaluation when an incapacitated person poses a danger to themselves or others." The legal weapon was elegant. If he filed before I presented evidence, every revelation I'd made would be reframed as delusion. The judge who heard voices, the federal appointee who'd lost his grip on reality. "You have 24 hours, Martin said. "Retract your accusations publicly, apologize to Diana, and I'll forget this conversation ever happened. Otherwise, I file Monday morning." He hung up. I set the phone on my desk, hands steady. 43 years on the bench had taught me to recognize tactical intimidation. Martin had just confirmed he knew the evidence was real. Innocent men don't threaten competency evaluations. What does a guilty man fear more than exposure? That you'll expose him before he can destroy your credibility. 4:30, Desmond called. "I found them," he said, breathless. "Took me 6 hours, but I cross-referenced every LLC registration in Delaware with Martin's known business partners. 4 shell companies, all registered within 8 weeks of each other last spring. Total assets documented $4.7 million, but that's only what he'd moved in the past 6 months. Cross-referencing the transaction history shows outflows going back 8 years. Total estimated transfer somewhere between $19 and $23 million. The rest is buried in layers we'll need forensic accountants to unravel. Names: Meridian Holdings, Cascade Trust, Lighthouse Financial, Evergreen Properties." He paused. "The registered agent for all 4 is the same law office Martin used for his divorce. Sloppy or arrogant. Same thing eventually. Diana's name on anything, not directly, but Meridian Holdings lists a D. Garrett as secondary beneficiary. That's not you. She'd been careful. Not careful enough. Send me the documentation," I said. "Everything you have." "Already did. Check your email." Another pause. "Dad, Edward, are you going to be okay? Martin's competency threat if he actually files." "He won't file. He's trying to buy time." "How do you know?" "Because filing means discovery. And discovery means I get to subpoena every document he's ever touched." Desmond exhaled slowly. "You sound like a judge." "I was one for 4 decades. Still am when it counts." After we hung up, I sat in the study as afternoon became evening, the light outside my window shifting from gold to amber to gray. The house was silent. Diana had left that morning, no note, no explanation, just an empty closet and a faint trace of her perfume in the hallway. Margaret's diary sat on my desk closed. Claire Morgan's information about the Astoria storage unit sat beside it, 3 pages of surveillance photos and rental agreements. And in my phone, still unplayed, past the first 30 seconds, was the full 417 audio file. I waited until the sun was completely gone. Then I locked my study door, closed the blinds, and pressed play. The audio started where I'd stopped before Diana's voice, sharp with frustration. "Told you I'm handling it." The digestive powder in his wine will trigger exactly the symptoms we need. Confusion, mild disorientation, nothing dangerous. Then the doctor's report, the memory test, the psychological evaluation. 3 weeks, Martin and he signs over power of attorney. A pause. Then Martin's voice, careful, measured. And you're certain it won't actually harm him? It's Metamucil, for God's sake. I'm not a monster. Another pause. Longer. Diana. Martin's tone shifted. I need you to understand something. I've taken additional precautions. What precautions? The powder you're using won't be sufficient for what we need. I've arranged for Rohypnol to be introduced separately, same glass, same night. He'll collapse completely. Ambulance, hospital, the works. Much more convincing than mild confusion. Silence on the recording. 5 seconds. 10. Then Diana's voice, low and dangerous. You did what? I protected our timeline. Your powder would have taken weeks to show effect. We don't have weeks. The trust restructure requires his signature before the end of September, or the Delaware assets revert to probate. Martin, Rohypnol can cause respiratory failure in elderly patients. You could kill him. I calculated the dosage carefully. He'll survive. You calculated... Diana's voice broke. I never agreed to this. I wanted him incompetent, not dead. And he won't be dead. But he will be incompetent. Hospitalized, evaluated, declared unfit. Everything you wanted, just faster. The audio continued for another 90 seconds. Diana's protests, Martin's cold efficiency, the sound of a door slamming, and then it cut off. I sat in the darkness, phone screen glowing. 3 days before the party, Martin had slipped a vial to one of the catering staff, a man named in the Shell Company records, Claire Morgan, later recovered with instructions to add it to the bottle Diana had already selected. Diana's powder was the decoy. Martin's Rohypnol was the weapon. Diana had no idea she was holding an alibi, not a plan. Diana had planned betrayal, but Martin had planned murder. The difference between those two things was a prison sentence. And a daughter. My hand hovered over the phone. 3 choices, each one a door I couldn't walk back through. Call Detective Brennan. Report attempted murder, present the audio watch, Martin arrested within hours. Clean, legal, irreversible. But Diana's voice would be on that recording too, admitting conspiracy to commit fraud. She'd face charges alongside him. Call the federal prosecutor. Trigger a full investigation into the shell companies, the trust fraud, the forged documents. Scorched earth. Justice served. But Desmond would learn his mother had tried to destroy me, and the son I'd just discovered would lose both parents in one day. Or call Diana. Give her the audio. Let her hear what Martin had done behind her back. Let her choose turn on him voluntarily or go down with him when the law came knocking. 24 hours until Martin's competency petition. 7.5 hours until midnight. And 3 phone numbers on my screen, each one a different ending to the same story. I sat in the darkness and tried to remember what kind of man I'd been before the evidence arrived. What kind of father? What kind of judge? The phone's light reflected off Margaret's diary, still closed, still silent, still waiting for me to decide which mattered more, the law I'd served for 40 years or the family I had left. 2 black FBI SUVs rolled through the Garrett Villa gate at 8:50 Sunday morning, and I, who hadn't slept since making the call to the federal prosecutor's office at 2:17 a.m., watched from the study window as a woman stepped from the second vehicle, Claire Morgan no longer hiding. I'd chosen the law, dialed the number, explained the audio file, the shell companies, the attempted murder. The prosecutor had listened for 11 minutes without interruption, then said 3 words. We'll coordinate immediately. I hadn't expected immediately to mean 6 hours. The first SUV's doors opened. A woman in her early 40s emerged, dark suit, FBI credentials already visible on her belt. Behind her, a man mid-30s carrying a leather document case. They moved with the practiced efficiency of people who'd executed 100 warrants before breakfast. Claire walked beside them, her expression unreadable. I met them at the front door. Judge Garrett. The woman extended her hand. Agent Sandra Reeves, FBI, New York Field Office. This is Agent James Okafor. We received an evidence package last night at 11:40 p.m. documenting conspiracy involving Martin Briggs, Harold Whitfield, and financial fraud against your estate. We need authentication. 11:40. 8 hours after I'd called the prosecutor. 3 hours before I'd finally fallen asleep in my study chair. What evidence package? I asked, though I already knew. Claire stepped forward. I delivered a USB drive and the Astoria storage unit documents to the Bureau's duty officer last night. Everything I'd gathered in 8 months. She met my eyes. Robert Morgan's eyes, patient and determined. And I saw the same expression I'd seen in photographs from 2019 when her father had testified against a corporate fraud scheme 2 weeks before his car accident. I promised my father I'd see this through. You made the call to the prosecutor. I made the call to the Bureau. We both chose the same thing, justice. 2 paths, same destination. Neither of us had known about the other. How much evidence did you gather? I asked. Enough to put Martin Briggs away for 20 years. She paused. Not enough to prove your daughter knew what he was really planning. Agent Reeves gestured toward the house. May we come inside? The study still smelled like sleeplessness. Cold coffee, closed air, the faint trace of Margaret's perfume from the diary I'd read 3 times during the night. Agent Okafor set the document case on my desk and opened it. Shell company registrations, wire transfer records, photographs of Martin entering the Astoria storage unit on 4 separate dates. We need you to authenticate 3 items, Agent Reeves said. First, the audio recording device. Can you confirm this is the equipment that captured the conversation between Diana Garrett and Martin Briggs? I looked at the small recorder Claire had planted 8 months ago. Yes. Second, these Shell company documents. Can you verify these match the Delaware LLC structure you discovered? I scanned the pages. Meridian Holdings, Cascade Trust, Lighthouse Financial, Evergreen Properties. Yes. Third, this diary. Can you confirm the handwriting belongs to your late wife, Margaret Garrett? I didn't need to look. Yes. Agent Okafor made notes. Agent Reeves watched me with the steady gaze of someone who'd interviewed 1,000 witnesses and learned to distinguish truth from performance. The audio file shows 2 distinct plans, she said. Diana Garrett mentions digestive powder intended to cause temporary confusion. Martin Briggs arranged Rohypnol separately without her knowledge. Your daughter may be guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, Judge Garrett, but the evidence suggests she's not guilty of attempted murder. I looked at Claire, Morgan Roberts' daughter, my unintentional ally, and understood what it meant to wait 4 years for justice while the guilty walked free. Where is Diana now? Agent Reeves asked. Upstairs. Hasn't left her room since yesterday afternoon. We'll need to interview her after we confirm the Briggs arrest. Agent Okafor's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, nodded to Reeves. Search team is inside the Midtown office. They went in at 8:45. Claire leaned against my desk, arms crossed. Martin kept everything. Contracts with forged signatures, wire transfer receipts showing exactly where your money went. Shell company formation documents with his handwriting on the margin notes. He documented his own crimes because he never thought anyone would look. Why would he keep evidence? I asked. Control, Agent Reeves said. Men like Briggs collect leverage the way other people collect art. He probably had dirt on a dozen business partners, all carefully filed and secured. In a safe, Claire added. Fireproof biometric lock installed in his office wall behind a Rothko print he paid $40,000 for. She smiled without humor. I watched him open it twice. He's right-handed, but he uses his left index finger for the scanner. Neurotic about someone forcing his right hand. We waited. The clock on my desk marked 10:15, 10:30, 10:45. Claire's phone rang at 10:47. She answered, listened, said nothing for 30 seconds. Then, understood. We'll wait for confirmation. She ended the call and looked at Agent Reeves. They arrested him. 10:32 this morning. He was in his office on a Sunday destroying documents when they knocked. Martin Briggs arrested. Agent Reeves stood. What did they find in the safe? Forged contracts. Edward's signature on trust amendments. Wire transfer authorizations. Corporate documents from 2019. Claire's voice tightened. My father's signature on settlement papers. Martin had been forging Robert Morgan's name for at least 5 years. Robert Morgan, whose car accident in 2019 had never quite added up, whose daughter had spent 4 years gathering evidence while pretending to work for the man who'd killed him. I walked to the window. The FBI SUVs sat in my driveway, engines off morning sun, reflecting off black paint. Somewhere in Midtown Manhattan, Martin Briggs was being read his rights. Somewhere upstairs, Diana was waking to a world that had shifted overnight. 10 years I watched him, I said. Smiled at him, approved his engagement to my daughter, invited him into my home. I turned back to face them. I was right about him, just 10 years too slow. Agent Reeves closed her notebook and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Martin Briggs is in custody. Harold Whitfield is in ICU under guard. Diana Garrett is upstairs in her childhood bedroom. She paused. Judge, we need to know, do you want your daughter arrested today, or do you want to speak with her first? I heard footsteps on the stairs above us, Diana descending. Diana appeared at the bottom of the stairs, pale and silent, still wearing yesterday's clothes. Agent Reeves watched her, waiting for my answer. I looked at my stepdaughter, 28 years old, conspirator victim, the daughter Margaret had loved, and said, I'll speak with her after we finish the hospital visit. Agent Reeves nodded once. Diana turned and walked back upstairs without a word. I stood outside Harold Whitfield's hospital room at 12:30 p.m. Day afternoon, with Agent Reeves beside me and the attorney blocking the door, said the words I'd expected. My client is recovering from drug-facilitated assault and will not answer questions on advice of legal counsel. The attorney was younger than Whitfield's usual representation. Emergency hire. Expensive suit, practiced deflection, the kind of lawyer who specialized in making guilty men look like victims. Judge Garrett, he continued, my client won't be answering questions. He's recovering from the very crime you're alleging he helped commit. Agent Reeves pulled a folded document from her jacket. Then he can recover in custody. Arrest warrant effective upon medical discharge. Conspiracy to commit drug-facilitated assault. Wire fraud, obstruction of justice. 48 hours maximum before we transport him to federal holding. The attorney took the warrant, scanned it, said nothing. The hospital room door stayed cracked open 6 inches, maybe 8. Through the gap, I saw Whitfield on the bed, still connected to an IV line, staring at the ceiling tiles. Gray hair against white pillow. 71 years old. Partner in one of Manhattan's most respected estate law firms. 43 cases handled together over a decade. He turned his head slowly and looked at me through that 6-inch gap. Neither of us spoke. 10 years of partnership. 10 years of approving his legal work, signing documents he'd prepared, trusting his counsel on trust structures and estate planning. 10 years of watching him smile at Diana, compliment Margaret's cooking at holiday dinners, discuss federal case law over bourbon in my study. And now this moment. A hospital bed. An arrest warrant. 6 inches of empty space where a friendship used to be. I nodded once. Whitfield closed his eyes. I turned and walked away. Agent Reeves caught up with me at the elevator. You didn't say anything to him. There wasn't anything left to say. We returned to the villa at 1:45 p.m. Agent Okafor met us in the study laptop, open notes spread across my desk. The room looked different now, not mine anymore, but theirs. FBI territory. Crime scene turned evidence processing center. Diana Garrett provided a preliminary statement, Agent Okafor said. She admits discussing financial documents with Martin Briggs. Admits knowing about plans to access inheritance assets and restructure the trust. She denies knowing about Rohypnol, denies knowing about any poisoning substance or method, claims she believed Martin was helping her secure power of attorney through legitimate psychological evaluation. Desmond sat in the corner chair, silent, watching. He'd been here the entire time I was gone, waiting, protecting his half-sister from a distance. Is she telling the truth? Desmond asked. Agent Reeves set her jacket on the chair back. That's what the audio file will show us. Officially this time. Where is Diana now? I asked. Her room. Not arrested, not detained, but we've asked her to remain available for follow-up questioning. Agent Okafor gestured to the laptop. We're ready to play the complete recording for analysis and official documentation. I thought of Diana upstairs in her childhood room, not arrested, not innocent, somewhere in the impossible middle where fathers live. Agent Reeves pressed play. The audio started with Diana's voice, the same segment I'd heard Friday night. Discussion of digestive powder, fake symptoms, power of attorney timeline. Then Martin's voice, careful questions, the pause before he revealed his Rohypnol plan. I'd heard all of this before, but the file kept playing. Segment 2, Martin and Whitfield recorded 3 days earlier at Martin's office. Whitfield's voice. The shell companies are secure. Delaware registration completed. Edward's signature can be replicated once we have the power of attorney. Martin's response. He'll sign. Diana will make certain of that. Desmond's jaw tightened. Segment 3. I'd never heard this part. Martin's voice again, alone this time, talking on speakerphone to someone whose responses weren't audible. Phone call dated September 10th, 3 days before the party. The timeline is simple, Martin said on the recording. Edward collapses Friday night. Hospital evaluation Saturday. Psychiatric assessment shows cognitive decline by Monday. Diana secures power of attorney by Wednesday. We restructure the trust by Friday, transfer the Delaware assets, and close the shell companies within 2 weeks. Pause. Once Edward signs the power of attorney transfer, Diana won't be necessary either. I'll handle the rest myself. Desmond's fingers went white against the chair arm. Agent Reeves stopped the playback. That was recorded September 10th at 3:47 p.m. Martin Briggs speaking to his accountant about projected timeline for trust liquidation. He was going to eliminate her too, Desmond said, voice low and dangerous. She didn't know. No, I said. She didn't. Agent Reeves leaned forward, hands folded on the desk. Judge Garrett, for the record, do you believe your daughter knowingly participated in attempted murder via Rohypnol poisoning? I looked at the laptop screen at the audio file timeline frozen at 4:17. At the 3-tier truth Claire Morgan had captured over 8 months of surveillance, Diana planning fraud. Martin executing attempted murder. Martin planning Diana's elimination. No, I said. I believe she was Martin Briggs's victim as much as his accomplice. She conspired to commit fraud. She planned to exploit my trust and steal from my estate. But she didn't know about the Rohypnol. She didn't know Martin intended actual harm. And she certainly didn't know he planned to dispose of her once I'd signed the documents. Agent Reeves made a note. Truth doesn't wait for convenience, does it, Judge? No, Agent Reeves, it just waits. She closed the laptop and looked at me with the expression of someone who'd interviewed 1,000 families torn apart by crime. Based on this evidence, Diana Garrett will likely face conspiracy charges for financial fraud and elder exploitation. 3 to 7 years depending on cooperation and plea negotiation. But not attempted murder. Martin Briggs faces 25 to life. She paused. Judge, do you want to tell your daughter, or should I? I looked at the staircase. Diana stood on the landing halfway between the second floor and the study, one hand on the railing. She'd been listening the entire time. Diana sat across from me in the small sitting room at 4 p.m., 2 chairs, afternoon light, through the garden window. And for the first time in 28 years, she looked at me without calculation, without strategy, without anything except the question, did you know Martin was planning to kill me too? Yes, I said. I heard it on the recording. September 10th phone call. Diana won't be necessary either. He said it like he was discussing office supplies. She nodded slowly, hands folded in her lap, the way Margaret used to sit when processing difficult news. The resemblance was purely learned behavior. Genetics had nothing to do with it, but it still hurt to see. I need to know something, I said. The digestive powder, where did you get it? What exactly did Martin tell you it would do? Diana looked at her hands. Online purchase. Generic fiber supplement, same active ingredient as the brand name stuff. Martin said it would cause stomach discomfort, but nothing dangerous. You'd feel uncomfortable, leave the party early for privacy, and we'd have time alone to discuss the documents. She paused. He said you'd be more receptive to signing if you were tired and wanted the conversation finished quickly. And you believed him. I believed him. Her voice cracked. He told me it was harmless. Just digestive trouble. Make you want to go home, nothing more. I leaned forward. Diana, Martin spiked the wine bottle with Rohypnol before you ever added your powder. Your substance was the cover. If anyone questioned it, you'd be the one who put something in my glass. Plausible deniability for him. Certain guilt for you. She closed her eyes. He told you it would cause stomachache, but not harm, I continued. He told you I'd leave early for privacy. He told you we'd have time alone for the documents. Documents that would have given him power of attorney and made you unnecessary within 90 days. I know, she whispered. I heard the recording. I heard everything. The afternoon light shifted through the garden window, catching the dust particles in the air between us. 28 years. 28 years of watching her try to earn something she thought she had to fight for. 28 years I tried to prove I belonged in this family, Diana said. He knew I wasn't your biological daughter before I did, didn't he? Yes, he knew. And he used that knowledge like he used everything else. When did he find out? I don't know. Probably years ago. Martin was good at collecting information and waiting for the right moment to deploy it. Diana opened her eyes and looked at me. Did Margaret know before she died? Yes, she knew from the beginning, before you were born. And she loved me anyway. She loved you always. Not anyway, always. How do you tell your daughter that the man she loved was using her identity crisis as a weapon from the very beginning? You don't. You just sit in the afternoon light and watch her understand it herself. I wanted to earn what I thought was mine, Diana said. The inheritance, the trust, the villa. I thought if I could just prove I deserved it, you'd see me the way you saw... She stopped. The way I thought you saw your real daughter. You were my real daughter, Margaret's daughter. That was always real. But not your biological daughter, not like Desmond. No, not biological, but real in every way that mattered to your mother and me. She looked at the window. Until I destroyed it. Yes, I said. Until that. We sat in silence for 3 minutes, maybe 4. The clock on the mantel ticked. The garden outside shifted from gold light to amber. Footsteps in the hallway. Agent Okafor appeared in the doorway, federal arrest warrant in hand, another agent behind him. Diana stood slowly, arms at her sides, and I saw her shoulders straighten, the same posture she'd learned in boarding school, the same dignity Margaret had taught her when facing difficult moments. Diana Garrett, Agent Okafor said, voice formal and careful. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault in the 2nd degree and attempted wire fraud. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you. Diana's arms hung straight. The handcuffs closed gently. Agent Okafor had done this before, knew how to make an arrest without unnecessary harshness, and she didn't flinch. She walked into the hallway. Desmond stood near the staircase, hands in pockets, watching. Diana didn't look at him. Didn't look at anyone except the white marble stairs ahead of her. I watched Diana descend the white marble staircase, the same stairs where she'd learned to walk at age 3, calling Margaret Mama, believing she belonged. She paused at the bottom near where I stood and turned her head one final time. For the first time in 28 years, maybe for the first time since she was 7 or 8 years old, before adolescence taught her to calculate and strategize and perform, I saw nothing calculated in her eyes. No manipulation, no performance. Just genuine grief for what she'd destroyed. "I wanted to earn what I thought was mine," she said quietly. "I didn't want to kill you. That part. I need you to know that part." "I know," I said. Agent Okafor guided her toward the door. Diana walked straight ahead, posture perfect, Margaret's training holding even now. The FBI vehicle pulled away at 5:47 p.m. Diana was visible through the rear window, head straight, not looking back. I stood at the villa entrance with Desmond beside me. "She's going to prison for 3 to 7 years, Desmond said. "Martin's going for 25 to life. Is that justice?" I closed the door. "No. That's just what the law allows when the real damage can't be quantified. 28 years of trust destroyed a family, dismantled a daughter who never knew she could have been loved without having to earn it." I turned toward the study. "I loved my daughter. That changes nothing about what she did. Both statements are true, that's the hardest part." Desmond followed me inside. "What happens now?" I stopped. Through the study window, I saw Claire Morgan still standing beside her car in the driveway, holding a manila folder, waiting. Desmond and I stood at the villa's edge overlooking Long Island Bay at 7 p.m. Sunday evening, Claire Morgan had left an hour earlier. FBI vehicles gone Diana in federal custody, and for the first time in 4 days, the only sound was water against dock pilings and September wind through the oak trees. The bay caught the last gold of sunset along its surface. Desmond stood beside me, hands in pockets, watching the water, the way I'd taught him as a child, patient observation before speaking. "Do you regret it, Dad?" he asked finally. "Swapping the glass, letting her get arrested, all of it." "I regret keeping silent too long," I said. "About Diana, about the DNA truth, about choosing not to confront what I saw because confrontation meant admitting my family wasn't what I wanted it to be. But today I do not regret. Even though she's your daughter, she was my daughter for 28 years. That's not erased by biology or betrayal, but neither does it excuse what she did. Love doesn't create obligation to enable crime. That's cowardice dressed as compassion." A boat horn sounded across the water, low and distant, marking position in gathering darkness. "Claire told me something before she left," Desmond said. "Her father spent 4 years gathering evidence, knowing it might cost him his life. He told her the night before the accident some truths are more important than safety. She asked if you felt the same." "What did you tell her?" I said yes. Was I right? "Yes. I wanted to study law because of you," Desmond said quietly. "I'd watch you at the dining table for hours, reading briefs, marking precedents, and think that's what I want. Understand systems, make things make sense. But today I understand why you really did it all those years." "Why then?" "Because you believe truth matters more than convenience, even when it costs you everything." I placed my hand on his shoulder, my son, 22 years old, standing beside me, at the edge of everything we'd lost, and felt the solid reality of him. Present. Here. "Not justice," I said. "The closest approximation the law allows. Justice would mean Margaret was still here. Justice would mean Diana learned she was loved before she tried to earn what was already hers. We don't get justice. We get verdicts. We get consequences. That's all the law can offer. That's all I could offer. And that's enough. It has to be." We stood silent. The wind shifted inland, carrying September cold through the oak trees Margaret had planted 30 years ago, the same trees Diana had climbed as a child, believing this house would always be hers. "What happens now?" Desmond asked. "The estate, the villa, all of it. Tomorrow we address logistics. Tonight we stand here. Just stand here." Yes, I understood what Margaret had known from the beginning. Love is not inherited, it is chosen. She had chosen Diana. I had chosen truth. Both choices had consequences. Both mattered. Tonight I'm a father who used to be a judge, I said. Strange how easy the transition feels when everything else has been destroyed. It's not all destroyed, Dad. His voice was steady. I'm still here. Something shifted in my chest. Not relief, not joy, something quieter acceptance. Yes, I said quietly, you are, and that is enough. The sun disappeared below the horizon at 7:43 p.m. My phone vibrated once. Email from Howard Aldrich. Saw the news. Federal case against your son-in-law. Need to discuss trust documents and Garrett Holdings transfer paperwork. There's something in Margaret's original estate plan you should know before the hearing. Call me tonight. I looked at the darkening water. Even in resolution, there were complications. I called Howard Aldrich from the villa study at 8 p.m. He answered on the second ring. I saw the news. Diana arrested. I need to see you Monday morning. There's something in Margaret's estate plan we need to discuss. I sat in the witness chair at the Federal Building on 500 Pearl Street at 9:03 Monday morning. Gray suit, no tie. 6 hours of sleep. The 2019 Queens property file lay open before me. The lead prosecutor, a woman in her 50s with 20 years handling white-collar crime for the Southern District, looked at the file and then at me. Judge Garrett, why didn't you report your suspicions in 2019? I could have offered excuses. I chose truth, because he was my friend. I told myself I needed more evidence before making accusations that could destroy a man's career. But the real reason was simpler. I didn't want to believe someone I'd trusted for 40 years could systematically defraud vulnerable property owners. I should have acted in 2019. That failure is mine. And you're presenting this evidence now because my daughter's fiancé attempted to murder me, and the investigation revealed Whitfield's direct involvement. Personal crisis forced me to do what professional obligation should have prompted 5 years earlier. Agent Reeves testified next. Evidence Judge Garrett provided combined with Claire Morgan's documentation proves systematic fraud spanning 5 years and affecting 12 property owners in Queens. Whitfield's firm facilitated illegal transfers totaling over $8 million. The prosecutor conferred with 2 colleagues, then looked up. We're opening a full federal investigation. All 12 properties. All connected parties. She closed the folder. Not triumph. Exhaustion. The weight of what should have been done 5 years earlier. Claire Morgan found me in the corridor. My father would have appreciated this. Tell him I'm sorry it took so long. He'd say better late than never matters more than people think. Howard Aldrich's office was on 48th Street, 20th floor. Desmond and I arrived at 3 p.m. Howard pulled a sealed envelope from his safe dated November 2004, marked confidential, and handed it to Desmond. DNA test results. Paternity confirmed at 99.97%. Your father kept this sealed for 20 years. Now it's yours. Desmond read it twice. You knew all that time. Margaret knew first. We decided together. Howard opened a second folder. Garrett Holdings $97 million transfers to Desmond upon your formal designation. Margaret structured it that way 6 months before her death. Desmond signed the pages steadily. Margaret's foresight becoming legal reality 2 decades after she'd first arranged it. I pulled her diary from my jacket and opened it to the last blank page. Diana, your mother wrote about you with all the love she possessed. I raised you for 28 years with all the love I possessed. None of this changes. I hope you find your path. Dad. Forward this to Diana's defense attorney, I told Howard. He read the entry. After everything, especially after everything. Howard sealed the diary in an envelope marked Diana Garrett Personal and set it in his outgoing box. Desmond watched, then said quietly, Mom would have done the same. We walked onto 48th Street at 4:17 p.m., the city moving without pause around us. Desmond stopped. What now? No case to prepare. No hearing scheduled. No conspiracy left to unravel. Just a father and son, a transferred estate, and the rest of our lives ahead. Desmond said, "Coffee first, then we figure out what comes next." We walked 3 blocks to a diner on Lexington, ordered without looking at menus, and sat by the window watching Monday traffic pass. Neither of us spoke for 10 minutes. We didn't need to. I stood in the villa's winter garden on a gray November morning, pruning dead branches from the oak trees that had watched 28 years of family history, when my phone rang with Agent Reeves's number and the words I'd been waiting 4 months to hear. "Judge Garrett, the sentences came through this morning." The garden was bare. November in Oyster Bay meant stripped branches, pale silver light, the smell of salt water and dead leaves. Margaret had planted these oaks 30 years ago. They'd outlive everything that had happened here. Martin Briggs pled guilty to all charges, Agent Reeves said. 18 years FCI Otisville, no parole eligibility for minimum 12 years. I set down the pruning shears. And Harold? 11 years federal prison. Resigned from the bar last week. $8.2 million fine for restitution to victims. 40 years of practicing law. 40 years of reputation. Gone. Diana Garrett entered a cooperation agreement with the federal prosecutor, Agent Reeves continued. In exchange for full testimony against Briggs and Whitfield, the assault conspiracy charge was reduced to fraud facilitation. 18 months home confinement, 3 years supervised release, 400 hours community service. She serves no prison time provided she complies with every condition. The court weighed that she was Briggs's victim as much as his accomplice. I looked at the bare branches against gray sky. Diana would walk free. Martin would spend the next 12 to 18 years in federal prison. Both facts were true. Both were justice in their way. The Queen's families, Agent Reeves said. Robert Morgan's estate and 11 other property owners received full restitution from Whitfield's seized assets. Claire Morgan wanted you to know. Justice arrived slow, I said. But it arrived. Better late than never, Judge. Edward now. 1 week later, I stood in Cypress Hills Cemetery, placing yellow chrysanthemums before Robert Morgan's headstone. Simple marker. Name dates, nothing else. 1961 to 2021. Gone 5 years before justice reached the men who'd taken everything from him. Footsteps on gravel behind me. Claire Morgan approached in a black coat, breath visible in cold air, holding a folded document, the official restitution letter from the Queens County Property Fraud Recovery Committee. She stood beside me without speaking, then held it up where her father's marker could witness. She didn't place it on the grave, just held it there. My father used to say the only person worth trusting is someone who doesn't need you to trust them, Claire said. They prove it through actions, not words. He was right. I wish I'd known him. He'd have liked you. After testing you for 6 months first, I smiled. Sounds familiar. Columbia Law accepted me, she said. I start next autumn. They have a clinic for property fraud victims. Second-year students work real cases under faculty supervision. Of course you'll apply. Someone needs to move faster than the system usually does. My father waited 2 years for an investigation that never came. Other families shouldn't wait that long. We reached the cemetery gate at 9:20 a.m. Claire paused, hand on the iron fence. Do you regret retiring when you did? She asked. Martin had been planning this for years. My retirement didn't create the conspiracy. It gave him an opening he would have found regardless. So what now for you? First morning since September, I woke up not knowing what tomorrow holds. How does that feel? Completely fine. Claire smiled, genuine, unguarded, the first I'd seen from her since September. Thank you, Edward, for finishing what my father started. We both finished it, that was the point. I watched her car disappear into Queens Boulevard traffic, then walked to my own, started the engine, and turned toward the Long Island Expressway. My phone buzzed once. Text from Desmond. Dad, need to talk about the property. Have an idea. You're going to hate it at first. I smiled. Good. That meant it was probably the right decision. I arrived home from the cemetery at 10:15 a.m. and Desmond's car was already in the driveway. He'd driven from Columbia for the weekend. Inside, I found him at the kitchen table, with architectural plans spread across the surface, the villa conversion we'd discussed in November. Scholarship fund, Margaret's name, students who couldn't afford law school otherwise. "You're right," I said. "I hate it." Desmond looked up. But it's the right thing to do." January 2025. Retired judge, 61 years old, father of one son. I stood in the villa kitchen brewing coffee while Desmond read an evidence casebook with a yellow highlighter, and nothing about this moment suggested that 4 months earlier one of us had nearly been poisoned, and the other had helped expose everything. Winter light came through the windows, pale and clean. I placed 2 cups on the table and sat. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. The table had a tea stain near the edge. Desmond had knocked over his cup when he was 12, studying for a history exam, and we'd wiped it 1,000 times since, but the mark remained. Some stains were worth keeping. "This case," Desmond said without looking up. "People versus Zakowicz, character evidence. What do you think? One bad decision doesn't define entire character." I sipped my coffee. "Your mother believed that too." Desmond closed the casebook. "The villa conversion. Scholarship fund. Still moving forward." "Yes, after the roses are planted. I made her a promise in 1998. Need to keep it before we change anything else." He nodded, stood, and went for a run toward the Bay Trail. The mail arrived at 11:30. Handwritten envelope. Diana's probation address in Brooklyn. 3 pages of lined paper, small, even script. She didn't open with apology. She opened with a question. "Dad, you knew since I was 3. Why didn't you say anything?" Then answered herself, "Never mind. I've read Mom's diary 47 times. You didn't speak because you thought it didn't matter. You were right. What I chose to do with it mattered. I chose wrongly because I believed I had to earn what you were already giving freely. Mom knew that about you. I didn't." The final line, "Mom was right about you in every entry she wrote. I hope one day I am worthy of what she wrote." I folded the letter and placed it beside the 2004 DNA results in the desk drawer. 2 documents. 2 truths. Both permanent. Both incomplete explanations of what family actually meant. "You already were Diana. You just couldn't see it." I didn't write that back. Some things take time to hear. Afternoon. I carried 12 rose bushes to the western fence overlooking the bay. Desmond returned from his run and sat on the porch steps watching. I dug 12 holes, even spacing, straight line, the way Margaret would have wanted. Each bush went into cold January soil with careful attention. Roots spread, dirt packed, water poured. A promise made in 1998 that some spring became 27 years later. I drove the final bush into the soil and stood. "Looks nice, Dad," Desmond said. "Mom would have liked that." 27 years late, but done. We stood looking at bare branches against gray winter sky. Come spring, they would bloom against the bay's blue water. Margaret would have stood here beside me commenting on spacing and variety. But Margaret was gone, and the roses were here. And that was enough. I picked up the garden tools at 4:47 p.m. Desmond followed, still holding his casebook. "What's for dinner?" he asked. "Whatever we make," I said, and went inside. And to you listening to my story, remember this. Justice isn't always immediate, but it's always necessary. I made mistakes. I waited too long when I should have acted in 2019. I trusted professional courtesy over instinct. Don't make my mistake. Don't wait for perfect proof when your gut tells you something's wrong. Don't let loyalty blind you to present danger. Family stories, revenge often begin with silence, someone staying quiet when they should have spoken. The lesson isn't just about betrayal. It's about the daily choice between convenience and truth. It's understanding that love doesn't mean enabling crime and family doesn't mean ignoring wrong. I believe God allowed me to face this for a reason, to understand that justice delayed might still arrive, but only if someone acts. These family stories, revenge, teach us that the hardest battles aren't in courtrooms. They're at kitchen tables and quiet moments when you choose between protecting someone you love and protecting what's right. If this resonated with you, leave your thoughts in the comments. Have you faced a similar choice between family and truth? Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Dad Family Revenge for more family stories, revenge exploring the terrain between love, loyalty, and justice. Thank you for staying until the very end. These stories aren't easy, but sometimes the difficult ones matter most. Final reminder: some details are fictionalized for storytelling. What matters is the message and the choice we face when truth and loyalty collide.